With our shelf holes done and our perimeter cuts done, I want to go ahead and calculate in some dados for the bottom. So we're going to draw in a rectangle, or have our script draw in a rectangle that is going to represent the dado. So to do so, we're going to come back into our script, our main script, and I'm going to give a global variable and also a setting, and call this dado layer name. And again, this is going to add it to the menu item. We're going to name this inside for a default value, meaning that when we see it in the list, it is going to be representing that we need to set our toolpath operation to the inside. So coming over to the table base sides, going to call in a dado bottom, copying that just to make sure I get everything spelt correctly, coming down and adding in a new subroutine, naming it dado bottom. So we now have a new subroutine that we're going to use to create the rectangle for that dado. For this dado, I do need to have the variables, or the height of that toe kick. I'm going to do a little bit of a trick, which isn't always things that you don't usually want to do, but to keep our settings lined up correctly in the view here, to know that the dados are all going to be categorized right and so forth, we are going to add a global variable to the top to be a toe kick height. And I'm just going to add a letter G to indicate that it's a global variable for this toe height. So I'm going to take this one and bring it down outside of our menu items and say that that is going to be equal to the toe kick height that is set within this variable. Now this will only work if we're calling the outside cut before the bottom dados. So if we did the dados first and the outside cuts, this variable is not going to equal anything until the outside cuts is called. So in this case, we are okay because it is going to do the outside cut, shelf holes, and then the dados. So within that dado, I do know that I'm going to need to use a section of code similar to this to be able to create our line segments. And for this dado, we are going to need a total of 5 points, where the last point is the same as the first point. So the dado widths are going to be 3/4. So the X position, we need a couple more variables and made up here. I'm going to just copy all of this, bring that down here, and get rid of what we don't want. So now for the placement of the first point is in the X direction of, and then we are going to subtract that global variable that we created all the way up top. And then I'm also going to subtract 0.75 for the dado width. I'm going to copy this section. And this is, it really shouldn't be segment 1. It should be 0.1, 0.2. But anyway, we understand, or at least I understand what that's going to be. So we want it to be the same, except for I don't want that minus 3/4 there. This is point number 3, which is going to go up in the Y. Segment 4, or point number 4, is the same as 3 with the exception of subtracting that 3/4 again. The last point is going to be exactly the same as the first. To close the shape, making a save there, and then to create that, we are going to copy this make part, and currently is going to the perimeter layer, which we do not want because we made up our dado layer over here. And there we go. So hopefully we will get a rectangle drawn in across the bottom at the toe kick height. There we go. So even though the drawing is right and correct, a couple things that we want to do, we need to have this rectangle extend out past the side just a little bit to allow that cutter to get all the way onto the outside. Typically 3/8 cutter, so we want to extend that at least 3/16 of an inch. So to do so, we're just going to come in and modify the Y location. Rather than it starting at 0, we're going to start it at a minus 0.1875. Also for here. And for the opposite end, we're going to add So if I save that, I did. I'm going to go in Tools and Nest again. We will now have those dados extending out past by 3/16 of an inch. And then we also have our inside cut labeled up above. So that is it for the dados. I probably will come back in later behind the scenes. So if you see this file, a lot of these hard-coded values are going to be turned into variables that are called up above, just so we don't have to make a change every single location. And I need one more closure down here to make that a completely closed shape. So there it is for dados added in. I will create a couple dados across the top of this cabinet as well.